In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be seated. For all the saints who from their labors rest, today we gather to remember them, to give thanks for them, to learn from them. Some we know, the capital S saints, like St. Francis, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Augustine, the named heroes of the faith who made their mark in the world and left a legacy of holiness that endures. And there are people we refer to as saints, lowercase s, people of heroically long-suffering patience, or upright moral character, or bravery in the face of danger. And both are partially correct. These people are all saints of God. But both, for most of us, are pretty inaccessible. We are mere mortals who lose our car keys and get really annoyed when the car ahead of us is going 10 miles an hour and has evidently never heard of turn indicators. We don't feel that we can live like people who bravely faced lions in the Colosseum and went down to glorious martyrdom, or even our saintly neighbors who appear to do everything right all of the time. We don't feel that we can live like these people. And really, if we're honest, we don't really want to live like them. Dying violently or living joylessly seem to be two models for sainthood, and neither fulfills Jesus' hope for us, that we might have life and have it abundantly. The advantage of these two models is that they pretty much absolve us of all responsibility. Folk who have halos around their heads, who have led perfect lives, who walk 3 feet off the ground, somehow untouched by the world, unscarred by human pain and suffering, by uncertainty and doubt. What do they know of our real lives? Does St. Anselm know about paying the mortgage on time? What does the poetry of St. John of the Cross do for us when we get a flat tire, or go through a divorce, or have cancer? The saints don't know what real life is all about, so we can admire them, but safely from a distance. Alas, for our illusions, the original New Testament use of the term saint, particularly by Paul, was meant to indicate all the faithful gathered to worship God. It's not about just the capital S saints, and not about just our own dearly departed who have gone before us, whom we remember today especially. When we baptize someone, we say, "You are sealed by the Holy Spirit in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever." Marked as Christ's own forever. There it is, your qualification for sainthood, being part of the household of God. And if it feels unlikely that you would sign up for facing lions in the Colosseum, how does one live as a saint of God? In a book on the life of St. Francis, the author Alan Paton gives 2 criteria needed to be God's instruments of peace, which would be a St. Francis way of saying to be a saint. The first is that we followers of Jesus were never to doubt that God can use us if we are willing to be used, whatever our weaknesses. So you can forget about the being perfect part and focus in on following Jesus. Today's gospel begins, Jesus looked up at his disciples. Picture being part of the circle of disciples standing around Jesus as he gently and carefully lays hands on a pain-racked man or woman. The entire focus of his love trained on this beloved child of God, ready to pour out his healing grace. And hands on the dirty, bad-smelling, sword-laden body of some hopeful soul, Jesus looks up at his disciples and says, "Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry, who weep, who are excluded and reviled and persecuted. You are blessed, and you will be blessed, and you are mine." Jesus spoke to his disciples from the heart of frail, flawed humanity, because that is where he lived, and that is where he lives. He chooses to be with all the world in its glory, in its pain, and that is where he calls us to be, with the world he loves, in all its beauty and all its suffering, in all its wonder and all its dysfunction. The saints of God, that's us, are those who are engaged in loving and supporting and helping God's world. That includes us. Nothing in that calling implies that we have to have it all figured out first or have extraordinary skills. The call is to follow Jesus, despite our flaws and our weaknesses. They are not the issue. Jesus is. Many of us hearing this gospel today are not literally poor and hungry, but those of us blessed with economic riches may be poor in other ways. We may be starving for meaning in our lives. We weep silent tears of loneliness and depression. We hunger for community. We are unsure of how to reestablish what got displaced by the pandemic. We thirst for our lost integrity and hope in a world driven mad by greed and cynicism. And God calls us to be there for each other, to work individually and corporately, with the poverty in and around us, with the hunger we see within ourselves and on our streets, to be there when someone else is afraid or needs comforting, or someone to look him in the eyes as if they were a child of God, because that is who they are. Sainthood, allowing God to use us, being willing to be used no matter what our weaknesses. The second criterion of St. Francis is that we are to see that God can use any other person who is willing to be used, whatever their weaknesses. This saint bit is not a solitary occupation. We, as the people of God, are in this together. We need to be willing to see God in others' lives, perhaps in people and in ways we never expected. There was an article in the LA Times this week marking the 50th anniversary of the ordination of Father Greg Boyle, the founder of Homeboys Industries. He has touched hundreds of lives, reclaiming them from gangs, from other difficult situations. Those whose lives he has changed now go on to influence and reclaim lives all around them. One would not necessarily or immediately think of a gang member as one spreading the good news, as one calling forth the good in people. But St. Francis is right. God is able to use people, however unlikely they seem to us. I wonder, as we look around us, who God is speaking through, who is preaching the good news of God's love, not necessarily by their words, but by their actions. We live in a time with more than enough angst, anger, hatred, distrust. But God has not abandoned us. We need to have open hearts and minds to see God at work through all kinds of hope, in all kinds of situations. The saints of God, an unlikely bunch, in all kinds of ages and vocations and language and economic status and background. The saints of God, the beloved community, the well-known ones and the ones who have touched our lives, those around us and those who now surround the throne of God. We give thanks for all the saints of God. This afternoon we will gather to give thanks and to name those saints of God in our lives. I invite you now to take a moment to remember them, to bring to mind all they have meant to you, and to know that they are now safely in God's hands. Thanks be to God. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.